If you look across the American technology sector, one pattern stands out. A significant share of foreign-born tech workers come from one country, India. This isn't an accident. It isn't simply about population size, intelligence, or individual ambition. It's the predictable outcome of institutional design, specifically how immigration law, labor markets, education systems, and corporate incentives intersect through the H-1B visa program in the United States. To understand why this pipeline became so concentrated, we need to stop looking at individuals and start looking at systems. Let's begin with the role of the H-1B visa. The H-1B program allows U.S. employers to hire foreign workers in specialty occupations, which usually means jobs requiring technical or professional expertise. Employers sponsor the worker, petition the government, and if approved, the worker can live and work in the United States for several years, often with a pathway to longer-term residency. On paper, the system exists to fill skill shortages, but in practice, the structure of the program creates a very specific set of incentives for companies, for workers, and for entire educational and labor pipelines abroad. First, look at the employer's side. The H-1B visa ties the worker to the sponsoring employer. Changing jobs can be complicated, and losing employment can mean losing legal status. That creates a labor market dynamic that is different from the domestic workforce. H-1B workers are often highly skilled, but also less mobile in the short term. From an employer's perspective, this can reduce turnover and increase workforce stability in high-demand technical roles. The program also has cost and planning advantages. Large technology firms and IT consulting companies have built internal systems around H-1B recruitment. Over time, they've developed legal teams, recruitment pipelines, and relationships with overseas universities that make the process routine. Once an institution builds that kind of infrastructure, it keeps using it. Now look at the supply side. India has one of the world's largest populations of English-speaking engineers and technical graduates. That's not just cultural, it's institutional. Decades of emphasis on engineering education, a large network of technical universities, and a strong orientation toward global labor markets have created a deep pool of candidates trained in fields that align directly with U.S. tech demand. But education alone doesn't explain concentration. The visa structure amplifies network effects. Once a critical mass of Indian engineers begins working in U.S. firms, informal networks form, alumni groups, regional associations, referral patterns. All of these reduce search costs for both employers and workers. A hiring manager who has had positive experiences with candidates from certain universities or regions may return to those sources. A student in India sees friends and relatives move into specific firms and follows the same path. Institutional pipelines become self-reinforcing. There is also a structural role played by outsourcing and IT services firms. Large Indian-origin technology services companies build business models around providing software and engineering services to U.S. corporations. To do this efficiently, they combine offshore teams in India with on-site teams in the United States. The H-1B visa becomes a bridge that allows this hybrid model to function. In this context, the visa is not just an immigration tool. It's part of a global production system. Code may be written in Bangalore, integrated in California, and maintained across time zones. The institutional design of the visa allows labor to be repositioned within that system. Now consider the alternative paths. If the H-1B program were designed differently, for example, if visas were more portable between employers, or if permanent residency were easier and faster, the labor dynamics might shift. Workers would have more bargaining power and mobility. The advantage of employer-specific sponsorship would decline. But under the current structure, the institutional incentives reward firms that can manage large, visa-dependent workforces. From the worker's perspective, the system also creates a powerful calculus. For many Indian engineers, the wage difference between working domestically and working in the United States is substantial. Even after adjusting for cost of living, U.S. salaries in the technology sector represent a major economic opportunity. The H-1B pathway becomes a high-stakes lottery with potentially life-changing returns. But this opportunity comes with constraints: visa uncertainty, long green card backlogs, and dependence on employer sponsorship create a prolonged period of limbo. Workers can be highly skilled and well compensated, yet still face structural vulnerability because their legal status is tied to institutional processes outside their control. This is another institutional tension. high human capital paired with limited legal autonomy. Now, step back and look at the broader labor market. Technology firms operate in an environment where talent shortages are frequently cited, especially in specialized areas like software engineering, data science, and cloud infrastructure. The H-1B program functions as a pressure valve, expanding the effective labor supply beyond national borders. Critics argue that this can put downward pressure on wages or reduce opportunities for domestic workers. Supporters argue that it enables innovation, growth, and global competitiveness. Both perspectives focus on outcomes. But from an institutional point of view, the key insight is that the visa system changes the structure of the labor market. It introduces a segment of workers who are highly skilled, globally mobile, and legally dependent on employer sponsorship. That segment interacts with domestic labor, corporate strategy, and global education systems in ways that reshape hiring norms. Why India specifically? Because the institutional conditions align. Large numbers of English-speaking technical graduates, established recruitment pipelines, strong diaspora networks, firms already structured to use the visa, and a long history of migration flows that normalize the pathway. Over time, this produces concentration. Once a migration channel becomes dominant, it crowds in more participants. Universities tailor programs toward overseas placement. Test preparation industries grow. Families invest in engineering education with migration as an implicit goal. The system begins to reproduce itself. This is not unique to technology or to India. Similar patterns appear in other sectors and countries when institutional pipelines align. But in the U.S. tech sector, the H-1B framework and India's educational and labor institutions have meshed in a particularly durable way. The result is visible. A workforce that is global in composition, but structured by specific policy choices. The key takeaway is that labor markets are not just shaped by supply and demand in the abstract. They are shaped by rules, visa categories, employer sponsorship requirements, education systems, and corporate strategies. Change the rules, and you change the composition. If the H-1B system were more flexible, less employer-tied, or allocated differently, the pattern of who comes, where they work, and how they move within the labor market could shift. If domestic education pipelines expanded rapidly in certain fields, dependence on foreign recruitment might fall. If global wage gaps narrowed, migration incentives might weaken. But as long as the current institutional design remains in place, the concentration of Indian IT workers in the United States is not surprising. It is the predictable output of a system that links global education, corporate hiring, and immigration policy into a single pipeline. This is not a story about nationality as destiny. It is a story about how institutional frameworks create pathways, and how, once established, those pathways become self-reinforcing structures that shape who gets opportunity, who holds power, and how global labor flows are organized. When we ask why so many IT workers in America come from India, the most accurate answer is not cultural or individual. It is institutional. And institutions, unlike individuals, can be redesigned.